in Georgia, I won by a lot, with a lead of over getting close to 300,000.
No, he didn't win. They're still counting the votes. He did not win Georgia yet.
And by the way, got whittled down, and now it's getting to be to a point where I'll go from winning by a lot to perhaps being even down a little bit.
Right, because they're counting the votes. That's why he's losing his lead, because they're counting people's votes. Legal votes.
The location of what was happening, and they stopped counting for 4 hours, and a lot of things happened.
No, there's no evidence of it. There's no evidence that anything improper happened in Georgia. None. No evidence.
Of 300,000. And Michigan, we're way up in Michigan, won the state. And
no, you didn't. He didn't win the state. They hadn't counted all the votes. You never won Michigan.
And that got whittled down. In every case, they got whittled down.
Right, it got whittled down because they're counting all the legal mail-in votes of people who didn't vote for him. That's why the lead went down, is because they counted the votes. 55% margins, and that's a margin that we've significantly exceeded. So we'll see what happens with that. But we're on track to do okay in Arizona. Our goal is to defend the integrity of the election. We'll not allow the corruption to steal such an No, there's no corruption. Actually, the integrity is being compromised by him claiming there's fraud and cheating when there's no evidence of fraud and cheating.
And manufacture results. I've been doing a lot of public things for a long time. I've never had anything that's been as inspirational by people calling, talking, sending things to us. I've never seen such love and such affection and such spirit as I've seen for this. People know what's happening, and they see what's happening, and it's before their eyes. And there are many instances which will be reported very shortly. There's tremendous litigation going on, and this is a case where they're trying to steal an election.
No one's trying to steal an election at all. No one's trying to steal an election. There's no evidence of people trying to steal an election.
Political places anywhere in our country.
It's a false claim with no evidence behind it.
Cannot be responsible for engineering the outcome of a presidential race.
No outcome is being engineered. They're just literally counting people's votes.
To the state Supreme Court to try and ban our election observers, and very strongly. Now, we won the case, but they're going forward. They don't want anybody in there. They don't want anybody watching them as they.
That's not true. I have heard of no case where Republican observers were not allowed to. Everything I've seen there's plenty of evidence out there of Republican observers being allowed where they're supposed to be allowed. I've heard no case where Republican observers weren't allowed where they were supposed to be allowed.
They should be proud of it. Instead, they're trying, obviously, to commit fraud. There's no question about that.
No one's trying to commit fraud. There's no evidence of any kind of significant fraud.
Away so far that people are using binoculars to try and see, and there's been tremendous problems caused. They put paper on all of the windows so you can't see in, and the people that are banned are very unhappy and become somewhat violent. The 11th Circuit ruled that in Georgia the votes have been in by Election Day, that they should be in by Election Day, and they weren't. Votes are coming in after Election Day. And they had a ruling already that you have to have the votes in by Election Day. To the best of my knowledge, votes should be in by Election Day. And they didn't do that. Democrat officials never believed they could win this election, honestly. I really believe that. That's why they did the mail-in ballots, where there's tremendous corruption and fraud.
No, there's no mail-in ballots. There's no evidence of significant fraud with mail-in ballots. Many states have been using mail-in ballots for years and years. There is no significant evidence of widespread fraud with mail-in ballots.
Because I've seen it happen. I watched a lot of different elections before they decided to go with this big, massive election with tens of millions of ballots going out to everybody, in many cases totally unsolicited. This was unprecedented in American history. This was by design, despite years of claiming to care about the election security. They refused to include any requirement to verify signatures, identities, or even determine whether they're eligible or ineligible to vote. People are walking in there. They have no idea. They're just taking numbers. They're writing down things, the workers, and doing a lot of bad things.
Multiple states have conducted their elections fully by mail for years. There is no evidence of significant fraud with mail-in balloting in the United States.
Pennsylvania and other key states are all part of a corrupt Democrat machine that you've written about, and for a long time you've been writing about the corrupt Democrat machine. I went to school there, and I know a lot about it. It hasn't changed. It's a long time ago, and hasn't changed. It's gotten worse. In Pennsylvania, partisan Democrats have allowed ballots in the state to be received 3 days after the election. And we think much more than that. And they're counting those without even postmarks or any identification whatsoever. So you don't have postmarks, you don't have identification. There have been a number of disturbing irregularities across the nation. Our campaign has been denied access to observe any counting in Detroit. Detroit is another place. And I wouldn't say it has the best reputation for election integrity. Poll workers in Michigan were duplicating ballots, but when our observers attempted to challenge the activity, those poll workers jumped in front of the volunteers to block their view. So
I would take all of these claims with a giant grain of salt because I am not aware of any kind of significant evidence of significant fraud in the entire country on either side. So all of these claims I will take with a giant grain of salt because he has a record of making claims that end up being false.
These were observers who were legal observers that were supposed to be there. In Detroit, there were hours of unexplained delay in delivering many of the votes for counting. The final batch did not arrive until 4 in the morning. And even though the polls closed at 8 o'clock, so they brought it in, and the batches came in, and nobody knew where they came from. We've also been denied access to observe in critical places in Georgia. In multiple swing states, counting was halted for hours and hours on election night, with results withheld from major Democrat-run locations only to appear later, and they certainly appeared, and they all had the name Biden on them, or just about all.
There is no evidence of significant fraud in this election anywhere in the country, and President Trump in the White House and no one else has presented any evidence of significant fraud anywhere in the country. President Trump saying something or anyone else saying something doesn't make it true. You need evidence to support your claims, and he is not presenting any evidence for any of his claims.
No mystery ballots.
There's no evidence being presented in this press conference.
Being cast after Election Day. You have Election Day, and the laws are very strong on that. You have an Election Day, and they don't want votes cast after Election Day.
No votes have been cast after Election Day. In some seats, in some states, people are allowed to send their votes in on Election Day if they're postmarked by Election Day. That's not elections. That is not votes being cast after Election Day.
This country is going to win. That's the way the United States will win, and we think we will win the election very easily. We think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof. And
well, then where's the evidence? I haven't seen any of the evidence. I haven't seen any of the proof. All I hear is claims of fraud without evidence being presented. So we'll see if they present the compelling evidence that he says they have.
I tell you, I have been talking about this for many months with all of you, and I've said very strongly that mail-in ballots are going to end up being a disaster. Small elections were a disaster. Small, very easy to handle elections were disastrous. This is a large-scale version, and it's getting worse and worse every day. We're hearing stories that are horror stories, absolute horror stories, and we can't let that happen to the United States of America. It's not a question of who wins, Republican, Democrat, Joe, myself. We can't let that happen to our country. We can't be disgraced by having something like this happen. So it will be hopefully cleared up, maybe soon, I hope soon, but it'll probably go through a process, a legal process. And as you know, I've claimed certain states, and he's claiming states, and we can both claim the states, but ultimately I have a feeling judges are going to have to rule. But there's been a lot of shenanigans, and we can't stand for that in our country. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that was yet another disgraceful appearance by the President of the United States. Why do I say it was disgraceful? Well, he did just what I said he would. He went out and presented no evidence whatsoever, and he made all of these claims that he claimed he won the election, which isn't true. He made all of these claims that there's fraud and that there's cheating and that the polls were fake polls created against him. There's been no good evidence presented for any of these claims. There's been no evidence presented anywhere of significant fraud in this election. But this president keeps going out there and just talking out of his butt and making claims without presenting any evidence, which is just somebody talking out of their butt. And he does it, and it undermines democracy because there's certain people who are going to believe him no matter what. And basically, again, it just goes to show he doesn't care about the country. He cares about one person, Donald Trump. He doesn't care about the country. He would rather go out there and do something harmful to the country, which is undermine the democracy, undermine people's faith in the system by going out there and claiming cheating and claiming he won when there's been no evidence presented, and he hasn't presented any evidence for this. Why? He doesn't care about the country. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about me. He cares about Donald Trump, and he's upset that he's losing, so he can't accept that, so he's going to go out and claim it was a fraud. That's what's going on. That's obvious to anyone who's not totally biased. It's clearly obvious what's going on. And people will say, "Oh, you have an agenda." Well, no. I have a brain which can see what's in front of my face. That's what I can do. If thing I'd say right now, and it's just there's no agenda going on here. You can see what's right in front of your face. You can see a guy who is just going out there and just talking out of his butt and claiming there's cheating and claiming there's fraud without presenting any significant evidence. And I told you it was going to happen because he did it 2 nights ago, and he constantly lies all the time, and he's been doing it for 4 years. So it's not a surprise. That's not having an agenda. That's not having a political statement. That's just being a rational person and seeing what's right in front of your face. So he's going to go down down to the end, and he's going to further harm the country and further undermine democracy because there's certain people out there who, like cult members, will believe everything he says, and he doesn't care because he doesn't care about the country. He just cares about himself, and he doesn't care what he'll do. It's just all about himself, and he just does stuff like that, which is disgraceful, and it undermines democracy. And you know what? Xi Jinping and Maduro and Kim Jong-un and Putin, they look at that and they go, yay! They love it. They love it because it undermines America, and they want to see democracy in America weaken, and they want to see America not be a force for honesty and rule of law and democracy, and so they love it. Putin and Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping and all these other authoritarian leaders, they sit at home and they go, oh, we're so happy. We're so happy President Trump is doing this. Because even if he loses, there's tens of millions of people who follow him like robots who will now go out there and say the system is rigged and there's cheating, and it undermines democracy. So great job, Donald Trump, for your own personal interest, because you can't handle losing. You're willing to undermine and weaken the biggest force of good and human rights and freedom in the world, the United States of America, and like one of the last remaining strong democracies. And you're willing to undermine that because you can't handle losing. There you go. It's the same reason. It's the same thing of Donald Trump couldn't accept the pandemic because it would be a bad thing for his election. So because he's only interested in himself, he thought it would be bad for him to accept that there was a pandemic. He thought the pandemic would be a bad thing for him. So he basically ignored the pandemic and to this day pretended it doesn't exist. And now we have a pandemic raging in this country. We have over 240,000 people dead. And why? And we have an utter lack of federal response. And way fewer people would have died if we had a coordinated federal response and people were encouraged to wear masks and all that stuff. And why has that not happened? Why has that not happened? Because President Trump only cares about himself. So he put his own personal interest of winning the election ahead of the entire country. And we never had he denied the coronavirus, never really any kind of coordinated federal response, still denies it to this day, has all the super spreader rallies. Why? Because he only cares about himself. So this is what he does. It's no surprise that he goes out there and undermines democracy and spews out all of these lies and that undermine democracy and undermine the country. Why? Because he only cares about himself. He doesn't care about you. Even if you're the MAGA supporter out there yelling for him, he doesn't give a crap about you. You might think he does, but you're wrong. He doesn't care about you. He would probably kill you all off if that let him stay in power. Honestly, that's what I feel. He'll do whatever's good for himself. So we have a guy who's going out there undermining democracy, claiming that there's all this fraud in the election when there's clearly no evidence for that. And also, he basically ignored the entire pandemic, and now we have over 240,000 people dead, and it's going to go way up this winter. I don't know if you've been looking at the numbers, but more and more people dying every day. Hospitalizations going way up. And why? Because it was bad for him. He thought it wouldn't have even been bad for him. If he just had acknowledged the pandemic, and done the least bit competent job of dealing with it, he would be president now. He'd be winning. He would be winning this election. I firmly believe that if he had just done the most basic acknowledgement of the pandemic. I mean, he could have gone out there. I had someone say to me the other day, and I agree with the person, he could have gone out there and made it like a business thing and said hey, we're going to attack this pandemic. We're going to get America on its feet. We're not going to be like other countries. We're going to be the best country, and we're going to kick butt on this pandemic, and we're going to you watch how awesome our economy is going to be. He could have done that. It would have been good for him. But that aside, we basically are stuck with this terrible pandemic problem and over 240,000 deaths and way more coming this winter. And why? Because he only cares about himself. That's what happened. That's it. That's why there's no federal response to the pandemic. That's why he denies it, and tens of millions of people won't wear masks and think it's a hoax because he would rather do something to benefit himself personally, that he thinks will benefit himself personally, that will result in a huge pandemic taking over the entire country. That's it. That's the choice he made. And now he's doing the same thing. He would rather go out and give a speech that he thinks will help him personally, even if it undermines the most powerful force for democracy and good in the world. That's what he does. Because he only cares about himself, and he doesn't care about anyone else, including you. He doesn't give a crap about you. Are you kidding me? If you think he gives a crap about you, you are deluded. It's so predictable. It's so predictable. Then he doesn't even take questions, just goes out there and says there's cheating, claims he won, which is not true at all. I won? He said, I won the election. He said, I won the election. In what way? They're counting the votes. And then we have tens of millions of people in America who still want to vote for this guy, which just makes me crazily pessimistic about America. I think it's going to be not America anymore, because America is dedicated to things like rule of law. America is dedicated to democracy. That's what America is. So, I mean, if you got tens of millions of people who look at this guy who denies the pandemic and goes out there in front of a national audience and repeatedly says there's cheating and I won when that clearly hasn't happened, that's someone who doesn't respect democracy, who doesn't respect truth, clearly doesn't respect rule of law if you look at his administration. But we got tens of millions of Americans who say that's the person I want as president. So That to me means we're getting to the point where we're not America anymore. We're some other country. The country might be called America. It might be located where America used to be located. That's not America. So, that's where we're going, though. That's where we're going. So there you go. So we got a guy, because one guy cares only about himself and and doesn't care about anything else except himself. We got to deal with this whole pandemic, and now we have lots and lots of people thinking there's cheating going on because they blindly follow whatever he says when there's no evidence of significant cheating at all or fraud anywhere. Because this guy is only about himself and doesn't care about anybody else. And he clearly can't handle anything negative, any kind of criticism, or anything bad said about him. So he clearly can't accept losing the election. So, it's just transparent. Couldn't accept there's a pandemic because it might hurt his election, so he had to pretend there wasn't. Then, clearly when he messed up on the pandemic, when he came out and said, it's going to go away, there's 15 cases, it's going to go down to 1, whatever. Clearly he messed up with that, but he couldn't admit it because it would say something bad about him. So he could never admit he did everything wrong, gave himself an A+ for the pandemic, gives himself an A+ for everything. It's just obvious. And